Welcome to Work in Progress, Conversations with Creators. On today's program, I have with me Maria Kelson, who wrote a book called Not the Killing Kind. It's her first novel. It's won a whole lot of awards. She's also been a poet, and we spoke about what it's like to be a first-time novelist and a lot of other things. I hope that you enjoy.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
All right. Thank you, Maria, for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks so much, Logan.
Yeah. And well, let's get right into it. Let's talk about your novel, Not the Killing Kind, which is your debut novel. You mostly, you've been a poet for a very long time. And, what was that like, transitioning to be a novelist?
Yeah, I had to learn all over again what a sentence was because I had been thinking in lines as a poet, where to end a line, how to start a line. And you can divide lines by phrases or you can interrupt phrases. But a sentence was a structure that I had to spend a lot of concentrated time thinking about. So that was a learning curve for me to get reacquainted with the sentence as an artistic vehicle. But, one of the things I really enjoyed about working on a novel was connecting to other writers of mystery novels or thriller novels and hearing their process and their journey and learning from them. So that was one of the things I really loved, was the chance to start again as a beginner. It was a real joy.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I want to dive a little deeper into that because I think it's really interesting. Like I was really interested in poetry as a teenager, and I went to college initially to be a poet. I transitioned into art and done other things. But then during COVID, I went back to school. I did a grad program in creative writing, but working on fiction. And so, yeah, it was a totally different thing because I had written, academic stuff. I'd written poetry, but like writing fiction, just like it's such a different beast,
Well, first of all, congrats on your graduate program in fiction. That's no small feat.
Well, yeah, I gave me something to do when there wasn't a lot of other stuff happening,
right,
when
yeah.
everything was shut down. So,
Yeah, creativity is the great alternative to despair.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess, yeah, let's get into it a little bit more because I think that, there's a lot of things that a novel, especially if you're working in crime fiction, you kind of have to have like that poems don't always have, like a plot, for instance. You may or may not have characters in a poem, but to really dive into the psychology and then what you're doing, I mean, you're really building suspense, which I think is a whole nother art, So, yeah, how did you, like you said, you're kind of like becoming a beginner again because
Right.
it's a different kind of writing. So, how did you approach it, and how did you learn to do those things?
Luckily, with a plot, the character's problems are the writer's friend, right? If the writer knows what problems the character has, then things can evolve as the character runs up against those problems, tries to bust through them, tries to go around them. So with this story, I had problems in some ways already built in two different ways. One is that I knew I wanted to write about undocumented families
Yes.
in particular, because I had worked as a family literacy coordinator and had, in that role, worked with undocumented mothers who were learning English in my classroom, my adult English classroom. And I realized there were issues in their lives that they could or would share with me, and there were issues in their lives that they would probably never share with me. And that was a real tension for me. So I had a problem as a teacher because as a teacher, I had been teaching composition in college and literature and creative writing. So I had been used to speaking English, teaching in English with students who had citizenship privilege. So that had given my students and I a sort of platform to connect for any students that wanted to sort of connect on an interpersonal level. And there was always something sort of missing in my experience with my undocumented students, because I knew there were levels on which I would never fully understand their experience. I was that sort of parallel living was a new experience for me as a teacher. So I had a problem as a teacher. And then, of course, they have, many strengths. Those students of mine had many strengths, and then many barriers to their lives and to their daily life. So I knew if I had characters that came from the undocumented community, they would have some strengths and some barriers, some problems. So some of their problems show up in the story, and some from my students, some are fictional. And then the teacher has
Right.
problems in the story. So the teacher is the main character. She's an educator, and she has, problems connecting with the community she's trying to help as well. So I wanted to give her my problems. So luckily, that's one set of problems that already came with the inspiration for it. Those are scenarios I wanted to write about. And then the other, ready-made plot problem that came was if you're writing a mystery, someone has to be solving a big crime, typically a murder. So I knew there had to be the solving of a crime. So those were two, and that's part of why I chose mystery. I wanted to write mystery or crime so I could explore, kind of the dark side of human behavior on the one hand. And on the other hand, I liked the idea that, as you say, Logan, there are going to be things a reader wants to have in a suspense novel or a mystery novel. So I felt that calmed my nervous system down to know, I'm going to need to include some of these elements to satisfy the readers. And, some people from the literary world will go, what do you mean? You have to follow genre conventions. Don't you find that so, constraining? Or somebody asked me, didn't the publisher give you a checklist of things you have to include? No, no to all of that. I think of it like writing poetry in form. So maybe, Logan, if you have enjoyed writing poetry in the sonnet form, or if you've ever written song lyrics or any poetry in a certain form or a certain structure, there's going to be a certain rhyme at the end of certain lines. There's going to be a certain rhythm. So I thought of it the same way. There's expectations in a genre. You're going to have to hit these, ways to engage the reader, but they'll be, I knew they would be my own. They would be the story's own. So I wasn't worried about it being constraining.
Yeah, no, well, you've done it masterfully, and then, done things that a lot of mystery or crime fiction writers don't do, which is to bring in these important social issues. I was interested to see, I think in your bio you mentioned Walter Mosley was a inspiration, and because he does that as well. He'll talk about race or different social issues, in addition to being one of the more, I don't know, sort of literary crime fiction novelists.
Absolutely.
We I think like book publishers like to divide, there's like literary fiction and crime fiction. I mean, this is also, it's all literature, but
Amen.
I think that but it was, that, I mean, maybe and then I want to get into the specifics of the novel, but just that I think that was an interesting connection. Like, had you been reading his books for a while, or he was an inspiration for you?
That's a great question, Logan, and thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. And I had been reading his novels for a while, but particularly as I was sort of winding up a poetry, project, and I wanted something new and went to something completely new. But I was reading White Butterfly, his White Butterfly at that time, and which is book 4 in the Easy Rollins series. He has several different series, and as you say, he tackles a number of social issues. And the Easy Rollins series is set in Los Angeles, and his protagonist is a working class Black man with a family. So right there, you have different layers of issues where something society-wide intersects with the individual's lives, whether it be race, economics,
Right.
gender relations, etc. So I did really love that, because that's something those are things I loved to explore in poetry as well. But, Walter Mosley as a model for me was part of a collective effort of marginalized voices in crime fiction that often, as their characters go through their lives embody these encounters with, either difference in our society or injustice in our society by virtue of being them. So I think he's part of this tradition. And in fact, there's a wonderful group called Crime Writers of Color. So if any listeners are interested in reading more of a variety of marginalized voices that identify as people of color, Crime Writers of Color is a great resource.
Well, that's great. They have a website and stuff
Yes,
people can go to? Yeah, okay.
crimewritersofcolor.com. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, because I was gonna ask if you had one or two other, authors you might recommend, but, there's probably a whole lot of resources there people can.
Right. Yeah, great reading list there. Yeah.
Great. So let's get into it. Sorry. So the main character, Boots, is, she sort of runs this school that, works with a lot of undocumented, um, students, and then she is a mother to an adopted son. Is it Haral? Is that how I pronounce his name?
Yeah,
Or
that's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Haral or Haral. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and it's, I like how, well, you start off actually with the crime, you just give us a little, plunge us into that, and then you take us back, to the backstory. But when we get into, she's narrating, and, it's clear, he's kind of, a kid that gets into trouble sometimes. And there's like the normal sort of like parent-child
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
But you're in her mind, and she is thinking about how, like, she doesn't want to yell. She has an anger problem, or that's been part of her past. How she was raised, she's trying to be a better parent and
Yeah.
all of that. But she has those, she she loves her son, but is concerned, and how do I?
Conflicting
And
feelings. Yeah.
yeah, and I thought that was really, like, I really love that dynamic, that you created between those two characters. Um, and then, yeah, I don't know, maybe talk a little bit more, and also, yeah, kind of how your experiences, working with students, sort of informed those characters and that relationship.
Yeah, great. Well, I knew I wanted to write about a family. I've been a mother myself for almost my whole adult life, and um, I knew I wanted a family dynamic. But with it being my first novel, I wanted um, a smaller and intense focal relationship. So one mother, one son, rather than a cast of characters. Walter Mosley
Yeah.
families in both the Leonid McGill series and the Easy Ron series are great because there's there's partners, there's others, there's stepchildren, there's children,
Right.
there's kids who come in and live with them for a few months and then go on, so there's just this like with just a abundant cast of characters. Well, I was a new novelist, and I thought, oh, as you say, plot was new, suspense was new, well, character was new. So, starting with crafting that dynamic, I wanted to make it very contained and focused within the minimal people I could. Well, what's the minimal
Yeah.
people to have a relationship to? So I have a family of two, a family of two, one mother, one son. And then the dynamic between them, you talk about she's trying to talk herself out of this, rage, which is driven by fear. She's fearful for his safety. She's angry that he's, being a kind of a smart ass. And she's trying to tamp that down because she wants to also get information from him, the constant quest that that parents will talk about with each other is like, how do we know what they're actually up to? And so I gave her that internal monologue that was kind of familiar between some of it my experience, some of it conversations with other parents.
Yeah.
And, and then I tried to make it more intense and make the situations
Right.
more difficult so that they're, she, in the end, she's not just trying to keep an eye on him or, control him, although to some extent she is. And also he's not just trying to stretch his wings, but to some extent he is. But they're both kind of like enveloped by these larger forces.
Right. And I think that's what's kind of brilliant is that it's such a relatable dynamic. I'm sure a lot of people who are parents or children, have
That's right.
experienced on either
Parents
side
and
of it.
children. That's right.
Or teachers or anyone else that,
Yeah.
and yet then that kind of mixture of love and suspicion.
Yeah.
Then as the plot thickens, then just that it becomes so much more intense, and you're
Yeah.
not really sure what's real, what's not, what's I mean, in certain places, and we probably don't want to give away any spoilers, but just there's moments that reminded me of other kind of works of literature or plays where there's a sense of doubt. There's the
Yeah.
doubt was
Yeah.
one, doubt,
Right.
proof, 12 Angry Men, these kind of scenarios where there's some kind of crime, and then it's well, did they do it or didn't they, or what really happened,
Yeah.
and how do people's prejudices kind of play into what we think may have happened.
Right. So she's worried about her son because he's accused of the murder of one of her former students. And you're right. She has to sort of wonder, okay, well, what's the explanation? Where actually was he? What actually happened? And he's in jail and no one is looking at anyone but him for the murder. So she has to find the real killer to free him. But he's also doubtful of her. He's doubtful of her intentions, her, will she know how to do the right thing in the end is what he worries. I won't say too much more for the sake of spoilers, but will he know? And so unfortunately, I'll still doubt my mother. I'll still on the phone say to her, well, are you gonna this? Are you gonna that? So I'll still second guess her, which is probably very uncomfortable for her. So there's all this sort of second guessing, doubting, wondering. And then I'm glad you mentioned the what is real, what is real in terms of the kind of story or the front everyone's putting up. That did bring a book recommendation to mind in the what is real category, which one is one of my favorite, subgenres of what is real. And I wouldn't say this is necessary. My book is not necessarily in that subgenre. Mine's more just kind of a straight mystery thriller. But for the what is reality subgenre, I would recommend The Mechanics of Memory by Audrey Lee. That's one of my.
I don't know it. So
that's a wonderful read on the head games front.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And then the parents at the school start to have doubts as well.
Yes.
That become that's a whole. But I wanted to get into, because I think that there's also something really interesting, like the way that you're describing how families that are undocumented aren't going to want to reveal everything about their lives. And so there's that, and that was frustrating for you as an educator. But then it's interesting in the context of a mystery novel, because there's an inherent mystery that's just built into their society, that they have to keep things a little bit mysterious in some ways, and that I think it's interesting how that kind of plays into these larger stories.
Yeah, for the perspective of Boots, she does find that there are areas that are kind of opaque to her. She's an outsider from within, from outside that community. And then kind of on the flip side, I wanted to show to some degree some layers of complexity within that community, particularly in regards to acceptance or non-acceptance of LGBTQ people, which is something that as a Mexican American woman myself, I've had, readily apparent to me, this whole continuum of beliefs or responses to LGBTQ people. And, those kind of variances in belief or variances in approach to life are sometimes invisible from mainstream discussion of, for example, people who've immigrated to the U.S., in soundbite speak, people who've immigrated to the U.S. are either, saints who will do anything for their families. Many are.
Mm-hmm.
Or people who've come here for no other purpose than to exploit others and commit crimes. Well, in any group of people, there's going to be both extremes, and there's going to
Sure.
be a vast majority in the middle of people who are just trying to live their lives, who aren't saints and who
Yeah.
aren't evil, but are just trying to live their lives. So I was trying to put some of that in there too, because, but even with that idea of like, okay, Boots, the main character, experiences some of the variances in people's beliefs. You're right. In the end, she makes mistakes. She kind of, like bangs her head against, she makes people mad. She makes mistakes because of her lack of understanding. And I felt like that's how I, operated. I did my best when I was a teacher, but I made mistakes. I bumped up against things that I shouldn't have. So yeah, in the end, she has real limitations.
Yeah, I think that, showing all the flaws and complexities of the characters, that's what makes them rich and believable, probably.
I hope so. Yeah, I like the term humanizing,
Yeah.
taking an identity that has become soundbiteable and instead replacing that with humans.
Yeah. When did you start working on this novel?
Yeah, it was around 2011, 2012, and then it came out in 2024. So it was a journey.
And we can talk about the journey, but it's also like a very different political moment than when you started on it. Do you feel like the kind of political or cultural context that we're in now um, might change the way people read it or the meaning that it has?
Um, I don't necessarily feel that way because, unfortunately, I feel that the idea of xenophobia, of fear of the other, is sort of evergreen in our society.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess so. Yeah.
so I don't particularly feel like it speaks to this moment any greater or lesser than to any other, in terms of immigration and justice. And so uh yeah, I don't think there's more. Well, how do I say this? I think the occasion to discuss um how we relate to each other as neighbors, as physical neighbors who live in the same cities and same states, I think the occasion to discuss that was there before the current presidency. It's here now,
Sure.
and it will be here after the current presidency.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe though it does feel like because things are in a way feel more heated that I feel like stories like this are more urgently needed now. That I mean, you were talking about humanizing people, which um, I don't know. I mean, I would wish that we didn't have to do that. We just assume humans are humans, but because there is so much dehumanization and demonization that
Right.
I think that stories like this uh do matter, and it matters for the people that are represented in these communities, and then for other people that might just be interested in crime fiction. They pick this up, and then it maybe gives them a little bit of a different perspective as well.
Well, that is my hope. If if and when and since it does get read during this time, then yeah, my hope is definitely that it is a kind of a doorway into conversations, whether anyone has a similar experience with any of the characters, or whether someone feels like this is their first exposure to some of these issues that some of the characters are dealing with. I think that would be a fantastic result for this time and place. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're getting a lot of attention. You've won a bunch of awards, so congratulations.
I appreciate that.
Were you surprised at that?
Well, I was very happy. I'm surprised, every time someone walks up to my table at a bookstore. So
Uh,
yeah, I was delighted. I was really delighted. And I think that the last one or most recent one was the International Latino Book Awards.
yeah.
And that was particularly meaningful because that's a wonderful organization, Empowering Latino Futures. I had been part of their Latino book and family festivals with my poetry books years ago. My first poetry book came out 20 years ago. It's
Wow.
yeah, it's almost old enough to drink.
That's funny. But that's a big milestone, 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd
Wow.
known of this organization for years and was able to attend that ceremony with some family members, my daughter and her boyfriend, and just to be recognized by other Latino writers and readers of Latino literature was very meaningful.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And I mean, is this now changing your career? Are you going to do more? Are you a novelist now?
Yes, I do just speak about novels because it is an all-consuming process. And I am working on another one. And yes, some people can work on both at the same time. And there may be a day when, it's time to work on poetry again. But yes, I'm working on the next novel. I'm eager to build on what I learned with this first one. So yes, this did kind of change the direction of where I'm headed.
Yeah, when you say it's an all-consuming process, I saw an interview with Salman Rushdie once where
Mm.
he talked about, like, when he's working on a novel, it's like he has all these cobwebs in his head. Those are all the connections, the characters, these thoughts. It's like he described it as cobwebs, and then he finishes it publishes, and it just clears away. And then he can start on the next novel, and he's got all these cobwebs again. I don't know if that's but how do you think about that process, I guess?
Well, what I like about the cobweb imagery, and thank you, I hadn't heard that before, the cobweb
Uh-huh.
imagery. What I like about that is the sense of agita. You see a cobweb
Uh-huh.
and you want to brush it out, and that definitely is true for me. There's a lot going on up there and I want to settle it down. I want to get it figured out. The tricky part for me about writing a novel is there are so many questions and so many unknowns that up until
Yeah.
it goes through the final edit, well, it could be this, or what if that, or maybe this, from the plot level to the chapter level to the word choice level. And all those, all those unknowns can get very loud
Yeah,
in
yeah.
my head. What about this? It could be this. What about that? So, um, yeah, so in a way, the writing itself becomes a way of trying to settle down, that static into, okay, at least this paragraph moves things forward in a way that makes sense. Or, oh, at least this surprise that I stumbled on as I was journaling or brainstorming seems like it will go somewhere. So it's like these
Yeah.
little reassurances along the way in this, huge staticky, like immersive theater of chaos.
Right. I like that. Do you write it in order, basically, or are you writing really out of order as you go? Like, do you have to go back and put in little clues or plot points, because something else changes as you're writing? Or, like, what's that? Like, is it a linear process for you, or is it really not?
Yeah, I had to bring linearity in um, a little bit further down the road with this one, with Not the Killing Kind, the one we're talking about that's already out.
Yeah.
I wrote a messy first draft, as writers are often encouraged to do, and then in the middle of that process, I wrote an outline that kind of stalled me out because I was like, oh, now I kind of know where it's going, and I'm mad and I'm sad and I'm bored and no exploration, whatever. So I said, okay, let me throw that out and just keep going with this crazy draft. And then I got advice from another novelist friend of mine, M. Dressler, who she said, oh, I outlined before the second draft. I said, okay, let me try that. So I tried that, and that was very helpful. And that outline changed. I ended up writing 8 drafts. So that
Wow.
outline changed and evolved, but it was still recognizable. It was like, if I was constructing it as a vehicle, it was a Prius for a while and a pickup truck for a while and a tractor for a while. But in all those iterations, it was still a vehicle with 4 wheels
Right.
versus the first draft was, unrecognizable without shape or form. So
Yeah, just like a junkyard full of car parts,
that's
I
right.
guess, or something.
That's right. And some airplane engines and like
Yeah, yeah.
and
Well, how do you know when you're finished? Like, you go through 8 drafts, how do you know that the 7th draft wasn't the thing, or that you have to go to a 9th draft, or
yeah.
how do you stop?
Yeah. I had to realize that there was going to be no end of questions. When I started, I thought, oh, I'll be done when I've answered all my questions about it. Like my
Mm.
questions like, would this be better, or should I change this, or would it be better if this happened there? And I finally had to acknowledge I will never be satisfied. There will be no end of questions. So I knew I was ready to send it out when all of the questions I looked at, because I kept a journal of all my questions about the manuscript, when all of the questions that were left in there were questions that I knew I couldn't totally answer on my own. I knew I would need an agent or an editor to weigh in on them. So I thought, okay, I've answered all the questions I possibly could. I would check them off if they were ones I thought I could resolve. Check them off, rewrite that little section. And once I got all the ones done that I thought I could handle, I said, okay, it's time to send it off.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Could you give a couple examples of some of the questions? Like, just so people know what you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know if these are kind of examples in general. I don't know if these were things that were actually in my notebook, but it would be something like, would it be better if we met minor character A in the middle of the novel instead of in the beginning? Things like that that were
Right,
very
right.
structural. Those I thought, well, I can't decide. It's like, getting someone's advice on music or on a new type of tea to
Yeah.
try or something. It's like, well, what do you think? I was ready for input.
Right, 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 right. But those are things that you gotta think of, because it's sort of, if you introduce them early,
Yeah,
then you get to know them a little bit, then it's like
right.
a reader might be thinking, "Well, what's this character doing?" I don't know, it might be too
Right.
early or something, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But then if they come as a total surprise, then it's like, "Well, where did this person come from?" I don't
Yes.
know, yeah, so they're really things that you have to think about, I guess.
Yes. And then, the delight of going through editing was being able to improve it in ways I hadn't thought of. So, for example, you talked about enjoying the relationship between mother and son, or being drawn in by the relationship with mother and son.
Yeah.
Well, that's really gratifying, because that was some feedback I got kind of later in the editing process. One of the editors said, "Oh, here, here, and here," with sort of specific places. I need
Mhm.
this relationship more fleshed out on the
Right,
page, which didn't occur to me because it was happening in my head. So I
right.
knew what their relationship was. I knew how
Yeah.
they felt about each other, but it hadn't come to the surface yet. So I'm very happy that in the end, with some good editing and good suggestions, that it did come to the surface.
Yeah, because I think that's one thing, that's difficult as a writer. It's like,
Yes.
how much detail to include, how many little clues to put, because it's like, yeah, you know it all, but you don't really remember, well, how much have I revealed already? And
Yes.
then you don't wanna just, like, do an info dump, and so you have to kinda
Right.
sprinkle things in, I guess,
Yeah.
so,
Yes.
um, yeah, it's interesting. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, I think, um how do I say it? Like, well, I think people will be able to tell sometimes that you're a poet, because you have
Um,
beautiful descriptions of things and really interesting metaphors. Even, I don't know, at some point later in the um, novel, you're describing a helicopter and the sound of it as like a film projector that's like burning up or something, and that, like, I thought, that's like a really great sort of image, and
I'm
stuff like
laughing
that.
because that's going to be a that's going to be a generational reference.
I mean, probably, yeah. But I went to a college that had a experimental film program, and they had
Uh,
the real projectors and everything,
Wonderful.
and uh, so I know that
That's
sound. Yeah, a lot of people.
wonderful.
I mean, it's mostly digital now, so people don't know film projectors. And but yeah. Anyway, I guess, probably I would imagine that's not difficult for you, coming up with vivid imagery, and maybe like I don't know, tell me, but maybe the more difficult thing is paring some of that down. Because I think when I first started trying to write a novel, which I still
Yeah.
haven't done, but I have one in process. I
Right.
felt like I was being like kind of too flowery, and I had to have professors tell me like no, like if every sentence has a metaphor, then none of the metaphors mean anything. So maybe you choose one per chapter or something, or a couple.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about that, like transitioning from poetry to the novel, in terms of that.
Yeah. And I like the phrase easy for you because I think that's it's an interesting concept. Everyone has things that come more naturally. That's kind of a way I think of as a synonym of easy for you is something that comes naturally. Or
And so I didn't mean to
something.
say it in a dismissive way. I
No,
felt
you
like, but
didn't.
it's yeah,
I like it. I think it's such an interesting provocation for all of us to think about, like what comes more naturally to us
right.
versus what are the things we have to consciously apply. We have those, in interpersonal relationships, parts that come more naturally to us, parts we have to consciously think about. Okay, I need to, do this and this. Same thing for writing. And yeah, I think because I had spent so much time with poetry, it did come more naturally to me to use figurative language, comparisons, metaphors,
Yeah.
descriptions. And in the same vein, first person was much more natural to me because that's often the POV of poetry. So those were part of kind of my mother tongue as a writer, so to speak. And I really, writers are so good at envy. We really, we really, if we could get paid for envying other people, we would all be totally flush with cash. So I really envy writers for whom the actual storytelling comes naturally. There are some
Yeah.
writers um, who, I've heard people say, well, if they say they don't outline, it's because they're outlining in their head. It's because they have an internal outline that may even be subconscious, but that they can write from.
Yeah.
So I think that's a wonderful attribute. Anyway, so yeah, the actual structuring of the story is something I give a lot more conscious attention to um, than I do these other things, figurative language description. But did I overdo it? No, I underdid it because I was worried about overdoing it.
Right, right.
So I thought, oh, I'm a poet, and nobody cares about that. When they come to a mystery novel or a thriller. Um, and they want plot and so off I went. However, Walter Mosley has quite a bit of poetic language. There's a number of
Sure,
mystery
yeah.
thriller crime writers that have poetic language. Reed Farrell Coleman is another one. Um, and so, I tried to leave in, things that would give it my flavor, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I did leave or edit out a lot of description as the drafts went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, to the point where when I finally had it accepted, that was one of the first pieces of feedback was, you could add more description and I said, "Oh, that I can do."
Yeah, right. So you added a little bit more
I added
back
more
in
back.
then?
Yeah, I added some back
Yeah.
in, yeah, after having stripped it out.
Yeah. Well, but that's good. But then I feel like you're choosing the most relevant and compelling pieces of vivid
Maybe it
imagery,
helped, yeah, helped me do that, yeah, having the
Yeah.
chance to sort of put it back in at the end as a seasoning rather than a main ingredient.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's and I think, that's helpful for me to hear as a writer, and probably other people. Well,
Yeah,
this is really
I'm
wonderful.
excited that you
Before
have
we
a novel
go,
in progress. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
what's that?
I'm excited that you have a novel in progress.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like I shouldn't talk about it because I don't know, I haven't worked
I
on it in a
know,
while,
I
but
know, I know, but still,
then everyone's like, "Oh, how's that novel going?" It was, still not done.
yes, the shame and the pain is real, but, it's all part of the process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Eventually,
That's right.
Um, so, you just told me about there's a deal on your novel if people wanna read it?
Oh, yes, that's right. So it is available on all your favorite online platforms or for ordering from your bookstore of choice. And then on June 22nd, which is a Monday coming up, it will be $2.99 on all ebook platforms. So that's Kindle and
Wonderful. Yeah.
org. Yeah,
So, yeah, anyone who wants to read it, $3, it's pretty
that's right.
affordable for anyone. So, yeah, great deal. Thank you so much for being on the program. It's been just a delight to speak with you.
Oh, it's been great to be here. Thank you so much.